Hello everyone, this is Mr. Molo for lesson 8-3, graphing f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So I want you to pay special attention to the essential question here, because this is pretty much everything we're doing today, is how can you find the vertex of the graph, okay? So our goal today is going to be finding the vertex. And usually we can just kind of graph it and look at the vertex, but with these, you kind of need to get lucky and figure out one point to the left of the vertex, one point to the right of the vertex, otherwise it's going to be impossible. So we're going to use a formula here. And the formula is negative b over 2a. And this will give us the axis of symmetry, which is the x for the vertex. And then we need to do a little bit more math then to find the vertex. And when I say negative b over 2a, remember, I'm talking about this a and that b there. So the number next to the x squared is always the a. The number next to the x is always the b. So if we're looking at example a here, I have 2x squared minus 8x. So that means the 2 is my a, and my b is negative 8. So instead of negative b, I'm going to put a negative 8. So even though it's still negative there, you need two negatives there. That'll eventually cancel out. And then 2 times my a, and in this case my a is 2, so kind of confusing there with two 2's. So negative 8 just turns into positive 8, and then 2 times 2 is 4, so 8 divided by 4 is 2. And like I said, this gives me my axis of symmetry. If you remember, our axis of symmetry is really just the x point of our vertex. That tells us where the line, or where the graph, gets divided in half. So I know my graph is going to get divided in half somewhere on this 2 line here, but I don't know where, how high or how low. So what I'm going to do now is plug in that 2 for x in my problem. So my problem is 2x squared minus 8x. I'm not just going to plug in 2 for that x. So 2 times 2x squared, and then minus 8x, and x is 2. So now we do 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 2 is 16. And so 8 minus 16 is negative 8. So then we figure out our vertex is at 2, negative 8. So that's going to be the low point of my graph. And so it would look something like that. So really hard just to guess, because if you pick numbers like negative 1, 0, and 1, well, then you'd really just get like half of a line here. You wouldn't know where the vertex is. So you have to use this formula to figure out where that half the graph is when it gets plugged in there for the axis of symmetry. So first we find the axis of symmetry using negative b over 2a, and then we plug that in there. Okay, let's look at some more examples that don't have a 2 in them. So it's a little different numbers. Okay, so if we look down here, so same formula, negative b over 2a. So remember, b is always the number next to the x, a is always the number in front of the x squared. So same thing as before, so this is a negative 10, so I'm going to have a negative 10. And then over 2 times a, and the number in front of a, kind of tricky here because it's just an x squared, so that's really just a 1. So negative 10 really turns into a positive 10. 2 times 1 is 2, so positive 10 divided by 2 is 5. So 5 is my axis of symmetry, aka my x point in my vertex. Okay, and then now we're going to plug in that 5 for the problem and see if we can find the vertex. So instead of x squared, I'm going to put 5 squared. Instead of 10 times x, I'm going to put 10 times 5, and then plus 2. So we're going to do some math here. 5 squared is 25. 10 times 5 is 50, and plus 2. So 25 minus 50 is negative 25. Negative 25 plus 2 is negative 23. So my vertex for this graph would be really low there. So it's going to be at 5 and negative 23. Okay, let's look at number 2. So number 2, there's no number here. There's no plus 2 like it was in the first one, or plus 5 like it is there. But that doesn't really matter, because if you remember, this number is c, and we don't need that for our formula. Our formula is negative b over 2a. So if there's no number here, don't freak out and be like, I can't do this. It doesn't really matter for our problem. As long as there's a b and there's an a, then we're fine. So here our b is 16. So negative 16, because it's negative b. And then over 2 times a. And in this case, our a is negative 4. So negative 16 divided by negative 8, because 2 times negative 4 is negative 8, is 2. So that's our axis of symmetry is 2. 2 is then the vertex, or the x in our vertex. And now I'm going to take that 2 and plug it in for x for my problem. So instead of -4 times x squared, I'm going to do -4 times 2 squared. Instead of plus 16x, I'm going to do plus 16 times 2. So then I have 2 squared is 4. -4 times 4 is -16. 16 times 2 is 32. And then -16 plus 32 is 16. So that means my vertex ends up being 2, 16. So if it asks us for my vertex, that's my answer. All right, let's do one more. So same thing, -b over 2a. So there's my b, there's my a. So -8. And then -2 times 2. So another 2 problem. -8 turns into +8. And then -2 times +2 is -4. So +8 divided by -4 is a -2. So my axis of symmetry is -2. My x and my vertex is -2. Those are the same thing. So now I'm going to take that -2 and plug it into my problem here. So -2 times -2 squared. And then -8 times -2 plus 5. So here, -2 squared is 4. 4 times -2 is -8. -2 times -8 is a +16 plus 5. So -8 plus 16 is 8. 8 plus 5 is 13. So then our vertex is at -2, +13. So as long as you can do some algebra with that -b over 2a problem, we're sitting pretty good there. Okay, here they want us to graph it. So we can either be using our Desmos stuff, or again, pretty much as long as you figure out the domain and the range, you're going to be fine. So probably don't even have to graph some of these problems. You can just, as long as you do the -b over 2a, you're going to be okay. Otherwise, we'll load a Desmos calculator up after this and check our answer and make sure that everything looks good. So number 5 here, this is a, this is b. So -b, so -6 over 2 times a. And a in this problem is 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. So -6 over 6 is -1. So that means our axis of symmetry is -1. And then the x in our vertex is -1. So we got to figure out the y. So I'm going to plug in that -1 into our problem. So instead of 3x squared, I'm going to do 3 times -1 squared. Instead of 6 times x, I'm going to do 6 times -1, and then plus 2. So -1 squared is just 1. 1 times 3 is 3. 6 times -1 is -6, and then plus 2. So then here we have 3 minus 6 is -3, and -3 plus 2 equals a -1. So we should have something like that at -1. So I'm going to graph this for you in Desmos right there, and I bet my axis of symmetry and my vertex are going to be right there with that 1, 1. So let's open up a Desmos tab here. And so we have 3x squared plus 6x plus 2. So exactly what I said. So if it asks you for that stuff, we know the vertex is at -1, 1, like we just did the math for. So you can also use this as a tool then, double check your work, make sure you're doing all that stuff properly then. So there's our graphing stuff. 6 and 7 are exactly the same. And then 8 wants us to talk about the minimum and the maximum. So minimum, kind of like if we look at number 5 here, since this graph is going up, it would have a minimum of -1, 1. That's the lowest the point is going to get. The absolute minimum for this graph is -1, 1. And you'll notice that these problems that are positive all have a minimum. So if you see a positive A plus, that means it will have a minimum. If you have a negative A, that means it'll have a maximum. So pretty much we're just looking at that first number, and we're going to be able to tell whether it's a minimum or a maximum. So here it's a -1/2, so I can already tell that's going to be a maximum problem. The graph is going to be upside down, so it's going to have a maximum. Okay, positive 8x, that's going to be a minimum problem because it's positive. Negative x, that's going to be a maximum problem because it's negative. negative 7x squared, so that's going to be another maximum problem. Positive 9x squared, that's going to be a minimum problem. And then negative 1/4 x squared, so that's going to be another maximum problem. And I'll kind of graph some of these and show you. Otherwise, then the steps are exactly the same as we've been doing. We're going to use negative b over 2a. We'll do one of each so you can kind of see. Let's look at number 9 first. So my b is 16, so negative 16 over 2 times a, and a for this problem is 8. So I have negative 16 over positive 16, because that's what 2 times 8 is. And so my x is a symmetry. My x in my vertex is negative 1. Okay, and then we're going to go in and plug that negative 1 in for my x. So I have 8x squared, so 8 times negative 1 squared, plus 16 times x, so 16 times negative 1, minus 2. So negative 1 squared is positive 1. Positive 1 times 8 is 8. 16 times negative 1 is a negative 16, and then minus 2. So 8 minus 16 is negative 8, minus 2 is negative 10. So I guarantee this will be a graph with a minimum, and the vertex will be at 1, negative 10. So let's see what that looks like here. So 8x squared plus 16x minus 2. I have to zoom out a little bit here. And there we go. So our vertex is down here at negative 1, negative 10, just like we figured out. So the lowest this point is ever going to get, or the lowest this graph is ever going to get, is negative 1, negative 10. And it'll never go below that. You'll never see this graph down here. It's not possible. The lowest, the minimum for this graph is negative 1, negative 10. Okay, let's do one with a maximum. Let's look at number 11. So same thing, negative b over 2a. So our b here is a positive 7, so negative 7. And then our a is a negative 7, so 2 times a, so 2 times negative 7. So I end up with negative 7 divided by 2 times negative 7, which is 7 over 14. So we end up with 1/2. Okay, so we're going to have to do a little bit of math here. This one will actually end up being a fraction. So negative 7x squared plus 7x plus 5. So I have negative 7 times 1/2 squared plus 7 times 1/2 plus 5. So if we do the math here, this will end up equaling 6.75. So that means my axis of symmetry is 1/2. The y on my vertex is 6.75. If you don't trust me on the math, you can go ahead and do that, but I already did it before this. And now let's plug that into the calculator and make sure that it is 1/2 on 6.75. So I have negative 7x squared plus 7x plus 5. And like I said, our vertex there up at the top is 1/2, 0.5, and 6.75. And again, this is a maximum because the highest point that this graph will ever be is right up there, 6.75, 0.5. It's never going to get any higher than that. So this is why problems like this have a maximum, and problems like the one I showed you before have a minimum. So negative problems always have a maximum, like number 11, and then positive a problems always have a minimum, like number 9. But as long as you remember this negative b over 2a for all this stuff, then you should be fine for today's lesson.